Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Flo. I'm with the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security and have been working with colleagues from the African Climate Foundation to convene the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. Today we have a webinar that brings together a bunch of leading thinkers in food systems transitions, and we'll be presenting several issue briefs that focus primarily on the demand side of the food system, in other words, downstream from production, and highlighting various different innovations in the food system and in its governance that could promote shifts throughout the food system, but also rippling back into the production side of the food system. So we're going to take another minute or two to allow further colleagues to join. Please take advantage of the text chat functions as well to raise questions throughout. There will be opportunities to pose questions to the panelists and also to have brief comments. But in the interests of time, today's session will be quite focused. We will be dealing with essentially two rounds. The first round, we'll be having a presentation on accelerating silvopastoral systems in Africa, presented by Liz Jeiyol. This is actually one of the last briefs that deals with production-related things, but thereafter we're going to be moving into a presentation on African Foodways by Dr. Kenneth Odero. Then a presentation on food processing, packaging, and storage by Prof. Rose Ramkat. And that'll be followed by a panel reflection by two panelists with expertise in food systems transition and change, Lola Choperan and Nancy Rapando. That'll be the first round. Thereafter, we'll have a brief plenary discussion before we move on to the second round. And in the second round, we'll be discussing food storage, transport, and distribution infrastructure. This will be presented by Dr. George Mark Onyango. The next one will be on food retail markets and informality by Prof. Dittoh. And the third presentation in that second round will be on urban food governance by Dr. Luke Metelerkamp. And that will be followed by a brief panel reflection by Mamadou Goita and Wilson Makore Mohochi. The format of these talks is such that we have essentially free talks. So we're not doing a PowerPoint presentation in the usual sense, although I will be sharing the screen of the actual issue briefs. The panelists are all people with deep experience and knowledge in food systems transitions, and they'll be offering reflections on the issue briefs that are being presented. Just a note in terms of context of these issue briefs were developed in order to provide guidance and inform the philanthropic strategies of various philanthropic donor organizations. So essentially, we are formulating recommendations as to how and where philanthropies should be investing their funds in order to help promote transitions of food systems that are aligned with the 13 principles of agroecology, and also obviously closely aligned with food sovereignty. And the point there is that we are expanding the usual perception of agroecology as being agricultural primarily. We're expanding that. We're moving away from that to really say that these transitions, if they're going to take root, need to embrace the entirety of the food system. And in fact, a lot of the agricultural transitions that we have seen the world over have also been driven by shifts in consumption behavior. And those in turn are influenced by various governance-related issues. So that is just by way of offering us a little bit of background. My colleague Malik will be joining our seminar a little bit later and will be taking over the facilitation from me when he joins us. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first presentation, the first talk by Liz Jeiyol on accelerating silvopastoral systems in Africa. Liz, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Flo. Good afternoon, distinguished participants. My name is Elizabeth Jeiyol. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you put on your camera too, though?
Sorry, I'm unable to do that where I am, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So this issue brief titled Accelerating Silvopastoralism Agroecology and the Resolution of Conflict Between Herders and Farmers in Africa was developed by myself, Mvu, Dr. Mvu, and also Barry. Unfortunately, none of them is available to join us in this presentation. Okay, so first, we want us to look at why it matters. What is the motivation for this issue brief? I mean, I would want to start by asking us to imagine a farming community where crops and livestock no longer compete for land, but together they thrive under the shade of trees. That is a promise that AFSTC system has in transforming the conflict between herders and farmers. In Africa today, so many locations are affected by tensions as a result of climate change between the herders and farmers. Most agro-pastoralist communities have been going through the issue of conflict. And this is an issue because for Africa, vast of the rangelands cover nearly half the continent, and they support more than 53 million pastoralists. Yet those landscapes and the livelihood they sustain are undergoing pressure as a result of climate change, as a result of land degradation, and other long-standing structural challenges, including communal conflicts that are threatening food security ecosystems and overall rural economy, as several house livelihoods of agro-pastoralist communities are affected by tensions and escalating conflict between farmers and herders that sometimes results into what I can call wars. So the SPS systems, they offer a powerful practical solution because the systems integrate trees and forage and livestock into single production landscape. And so there is more than just a farming method because it offers a lot of benefits in terms of the environment, in terms of, enhancing the production and sustainability of the environment. And so environmentally, they help in restoring the degraded rangelands. They help in improving the soil fertility. They help in capturing carbon, that's carbon sequestration, and they protect biodiversity. They also help communities to adapt to climate change and drought situations. So socioeconomically, they boost livestock production and they help to facilitate yields. They reduce farmer-herder conflicts in the end, and it's believed that this can strengthen local economies by building resilience and sustainability of rural livelihoods. Globally, it's been observed that SPS system, they contribute to advancing and realization of several SDGs, and that includes famine, poverty, and also food security. In a way, it also directly contributes to addressing climate change by also raising resilience of farming communities. And so in essence, this is going to help in ensuring that climate smart agriculture pathways are strengthened as communities are able to integrate farming and also rearing of animals all together without breaking down in terms of, and that will help in minimizing, the tensions and the conflict situations that usually occurs. And so in developing this issue brief, we're able to make some findings that have to do with several issues, one of which is the state of transition funding. And we realize that this system offers a powerful climate pathway that will help and will enable sustainable agriculture. But there is an issue of funding. Most governments prefer to fund chemical-intensive farming, what is called the conventional agriculture. And so they are not able to support they are not able to support, a scaling of the initiatives, these initiatives that will help prevent conflict between farmers or reduce conflicts between farmers and herders. Also, the short-term grants in terms of SPS systems are short, and there are also other structural barriers having to do with land accessibility and ownership, having to do with limited policy support in most of our African countries today. Policies, supporting silvopastoral systems are not yet in place, and this is an issue. And so there are also the issue of major knowledge and other environmental barriers. This has also, in a way, is affecting adoption, wide-scale adoption of this system. Many farmers and pastoralists also, they lack training, they lack extension services, and so this is also constraining the wide adoption of this system. There are also other cross-cutting issues that have to do with, for instance, gender and social inclusion. It remains one of the major challenges for adoption of this system because women and youth, who are the major actors in terms of farming communities, they lack access to land, they lack access to several other non-land resources, including credit, including training. They are also not able to participate in policy decisions as well. And that also includes even in the livestock and other resource management. That notwithstanding, there are current initiatives that in the course of developing this issue brief, we observe useful and are helping. We have the Green Great Wall Initiative, which can, if clearly taken up or upscale, can integrate SPS through grazing corridors and agroforestry to combat desertification. We have the farmer-managed natural regeneration model, which can be linked to SPSS for broader land restoration and conflict resolution. We have the expanding the header for health program, which we strengthen community training, policy advocacy, and market access. And so we were able to also advance key recommendations that will help philanthropy to look into supporting the SPS system in Africa. And so philanthropy organizations, we believe they can play a role in accelerating the adoption of SPS system across Africa. First, it is essential to empower communities, and it is believed that once communities are empowered through community-led projects, that will help pastoralists and also smallholder farmers at the center to be able to adopt SPS systems. We also advocated for promotion of gender equality. This will ensure women have their fair access to land, finance, and training. And they will be able to utilize indigenous knowledge and scientific research, which can also help in creating locally relevant and sustainable solutions. Philanthropy should also support long-term project as in what is obtainable at the moment. And so once these projects are upscaled, they can help in integrating international agricultural and land policies, and that will help in ensuring the rights of pastoralists and also of farmers are protected, and that can be done through policy engagement. Another recommendation has to do with mobilizing capital and markets for de-risking investment. This will help in providing microfinance and grants to small-scale farmer holders and develop market incentives. This will enable sustainable products such as organic, such as dairy and timber. They can also invest in research. This will help in innovation. At the moment, not so much is being done in terms of research, and we know that research is has funding implications. And so if they are able to fund context-specific studies to advance digital tools for land and livestock management, this will also help in the adoption of SPS systems. Throughout these actions, it is hoped that philanthropy can transform and assist in adoption of SPS into scalable climate-smart pathways that will enable and contribute to resilience, livelihoods, healthy ecosystems, and inclusive economic growth. And I want to end by saying that behind every statistics of the conflict involving farmer header crisis is a family that is uprooted, a child that is hungry, or a life that is cut short. The farmer header conflicts is not only about land, it is about survival, it is about dignity, and it is about shared futures. And so SPS systems offers a chance to restore soil, to help in capture of carbon, to increase food and fodder, and build peace between farmers and herders. And I therefore call on philanthropists and leaders to act now, because by investing in SPS systems, they can empower communities, they can help in closing the gap on gender equality in access to agro products, and they can help restore degraded lands and transform the climate crisis into a solution. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that great presentation. You laid out clearly the need for this to support socioeconomic outcomes, to avoid further conflict, to improve biodiversity and adapt to the impacts of climate change. I think the recommendations or call to action were clear. It was on direct support to these interventions, but beyond just piloting projects, rather supporting the scaling, but also on supporting the enabling environment around them. So the legislative frameworks, the research, the governance mechanisms available to them. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on now, and this is back in keeping with the focus of today's session, which is the sort of downstream demand to transform African food systems. And for that, I'm going to call on Kenneth Odero to walk us through African Indigenous foodways.
Thanks, Malik, and greetings to everyone. The core relevance of the theme that I'm presenting is on the strategic transformation of African food systems through targeted investment in African indigenous foodways. And that's a specific term that just doesn't look at the foods, but also the cultural practices around their production and so on. So one of the key questions we were interested in is how can philanthropy that funds agroecology place African indigenous foodways at the center of their strategy. And in pursuing this key question, we ask ourselves two sub-questions. Is there a place for philanthropy to influence the actions of big food and industrial agriculture? And then secondly, how are funders and grantees working together to pursue responsible agroecology driven food systems transformation? So that's really the scope of what this was about. And we see that there are systemic opportunities, you know, and transformation of food systems is really not merely a challenge, but is one of the greatest investment opportunities. And philanthropy is uniquely positioned to act with flexibility and long-term vision. We also see immense potential in which African food systems are self-sufficient, sustainable, and resilient. And this potential includes enhancing food and nutritional security using diverse, rather rooted, dense foods, building climate resilient agricultural systems, and fostering economic empowerment, particularly, but not exclusively among women and youth. And there's a particular note that women are wonderful knowledge holders and co-creators. So what are the key findings and insights of this collaborative research work that was done across you know, multiple countries in West Africa, Southern Africa, and East Africa, you know, by a team of very experienced researchers? Now, there's a need to counter the stigmatization of African indigenous foodways and foods as poor man's food by building a robust evidence-based case for their use. So countering stigmatization is critical. Then preventing knowledge erosion. The erosion of intergenerational knowledge regarding the cultivation, preparation, preservation of indigenous foods must be preserved. And the cultural heritage of food sovereignty is essential in the transformation journey. Then philanthropy is also crucial in de-risking investment, as it can act as a catalytic capital in blending finance models to de-risk larger private investments that traditional investors might deem too risky for the indigenous food value chains. Then also there's, you know, an opportunity in terms of creating viable markets that pull, you know, in together, you know, at a local to the network level. So in order not to take too much time, what are the practical recommendations for philanthropy? So there are about 4 or 5 areas to do with research and data curation, value chain and enterprise development, market creation and consumer awareness, policy and advocacy, and then collaborative blending of finance. In terms of funding research, we think that philanthropy should consider funding research on the nutritional profiles, climate resilience, and agronomy of indigenous crops. They can also support the documentation of indigenous knowledge concerning cultivation, preparation, and preservation of traditional foods. This is being done, but they can, you know, enhance research and data curation. In terms of value chain and enterprise development, really the objective is to demonstrate the commercial viability of agroecologically produced indigenous foods. So seed funding and grants is critical directly to indigenous food enterprises, processors, and aggregators in order to help them overcome initial market barriers. Then funding should also be allocated for the development of technology, processing technology, storage technology, packaging technologies, tailored specifically for indigenous foods. And this can help reduce post-harvest losses, external shelf life, extend the shelf life, and improve the marketability of perishable indigenous foods. Then there's the whole area of market creation and consumer awareness through, for example, public campaigns. Launching public campaigns, awareness campaigns that focus on the promotion of nutritional and cultural benefit of indigenous foods to sort of foster the cultural profile. Supporting chefs, restaurants, and agri-tourism businesses that feature indigenous cuisines to create a visible market pool is another practical and helpful area. In terms of policy and advocacy, we propose funding civil society organizations and think tanks tasked with advocating for pro-AIF policies, such as integrating, African indigenous foodways into national agricultural policies and school feeding programs. Throughout all the case studies that are shown in the policy issue, in the issue brief, there are emerging examples from different countries. Then supporting dialogue platforms designed for cross-sectoral dialogue involving policymakers, business leaders, and farmers, which can also help to create cohesion. And obviously, investing in roadmaps for the food system transformation. Then finally, the other area is collaboration and blended finance. Okay. The goal is to catalyze commercial capital, okay, within blended finance model that is used to de-risk larger private capital. Then, last but not least, dedicated grant making. Establish dedicated grant making programs that focus explicitly on the indigenous food system, providing the necessary flexible and patient capital for community-led initiatives. Now, we don't say that this is exhaustive, but we think that these are critical areas that the philanthropists have a role to play. Thank you very much, Malik.
Thanks very much, Kenneth. Clear need for this kind of these food systems and products to be valued much higher than they already are. And I think that the sort of call to action or the recommendations that you've laid out speak to that. It's the need to invest in the research to understand their value as a climate adaptation solution in our crop production, their nutritional contribution, their relevance to local cultures and social systems. But going beyond that, it's about developing the markets around them, enterprise developments, investing in the infrastructure for them, and the different ways in which philanthropies operate through blended capital, through de-risking, and like I said, through enterprise development before that. We're going to move to our next speaker just because we're running a little bit behind time, which is on food environments and about investing in urban food systems for health and sustainability.
Sorry, no. We're actually food processing.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Food processing, packaging, and storage, Rose Ramkat.
Seems Rose is not on the call yet.
Yeah, it looks like Rose dropped off. Luke, would you be okay to present first, and then we can go to Rose when she rejoins?
Yeah, I can do this. Flo, did you want to have a panel discussion in between? But I can also jump in. Fine.
I think you can go ahead and we'll put in the panel discussion after.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. Then I will jump in. I'm just going to share my screen on my side. Great. Afternoon, everyone. Just going to turn my camera on. Thanks for having us here, and thanks, I think, Flo and Malik, just for all the work you've done in the background to get these across the line and happening. I think it's a real contribution. So, yeah, I'm here representing ICLEI Africa today, but also presenting on behalf of the authorship team on this issue brief. I'll present them all at the end. But I think just to say that, we are looking specifically at the kind of urban dimensions, as I think Flo introduced in the beginning, and focusing on this notion of food environments, which I think links up quite nicely with much of what Sai was talking about, and I think it's a kind of a broader articulation of some of that work, and a lot of crossover between the two, and I think there's a lot of similarities also in some of the solutions being proposed. I think for me, always kind of starting and stepping back a little bit around the kind of why the focus on the urban, and I think for us in a rapidly urbanizing continent, this figure came out recently from the HLPE report, which highlights that 76% of the kind of world's hungry population lives in urban and peri-urban areas now, and as Africa urbanizes, this is going to become an increasingly African statistic. I think the other figure that really stands out for me when we talk about transforming urban food environments is, particularly in Africa, is the dietary transition that's underway in Africa. And we know now that the kind of rates of increase of childhood overweight and obesity and various forms of malnutrition are 3 times higher in Africa than they are in much of the rest of the world. So we're starting from a low base, but the rate of change is exceptionally fast across Africa's cities. So what is it when we talk about food environments? What are we referring to? And I think broadly speaking, this is the I suppose a kind of intervention lens that thinks about the decision-making structures in which everyday citizens think about their day-to-day dietary decision-making, and the structures and systems that kind of confine and enable this. So there's kind of 4 broad dimensions that we looked at in the paper. The first was around the physical environment. So, how close are you to what types of retail outlets? How far do you have to walk to get which types of food? And how are those types of dynamics changing within African cities today? The second was around the economic environment, obviously. What do different types of food cost? What purchasing power do people have? What economic incentives are in place to kind of support or nudge different types of behavior processes. And then there's the third one around the social environments. So, what are the cultural structures, the cultural systems in place? But I think also what are the cultural shifts and changes taking place as societies urbanize. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And then lastly is around the infrastructural one. So, and there's an increasing focus here on how does infrastructure in the built environment play a role in defining the way that people make decisions around food? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest in Southern Africa that energy prices, water infrastructure actually have quite profound impacts on the way that people make decisions around food. So just looking at this image, I think it represents a lot of different dimensions of this. The advertising, for example, that children and adults are exposed to, increasing prevalence of, fast food delivery serviced and packaged foods, the penetration of supermarkets, but also the real prevalence and resilience of street vending and informal trade across much of our cities, and many other aspects. So these are the kind of some of the dimensions that the concept of food environments tries to draw together. And I think, framing this within the context of an African city, thinking about how, as we urbanize, what shape the day-to-day spaces we find ourselves in take. Are we existing in a bustling street markets, and what's the infrastructure and services and things that are available in those markets? How safe is food in those markets? How affordable is it? Or are we finding ourselves in increasingly supermarketized type environments and confronted with all the different various decisions we make there around highly processed foods? And that's not to say that they're not that doesn't exist in the other system too, but I think that this just gives a little bit of a contrast around the types of environments and the kind of engagement around this topic. So I think, the key messages from our issue brief were really that there's a profound dietary transition underway currently in Africa, and that's really being catalyzed by cities. And it's not just the changes that are taking place within cities, but also to acknowledge that within the next 20 years, 50% of rural Africans will also be living within 14 to 15 kilometers of an urban center or city. So I think we often think about the flow of influence from and goods and services from rural areas and food into cities, but I think the cultural dimensions and the preferences within the food system that exist in cities we're increasingly seeing that having a pushback into the types of diets and behaviors in rural areas too, as they are increasingly placed close to cities. We also argue that there's a very narrow window of opportunity now to act and get the kind of cultures, policies, and infrastructures in place in our cities. We are at the kind of cusp of a doubling of our urban population over the next 25 years. And what we don't get right now will essentially be a kind of systemic lock-in, for the next 100. We also say, that there are quite clear pathways, both in terms of policy mechanisms, but a range of other activities too, for engaging and acting on this. And there's been quite a lot of work done across Africa and elsewhere in the world around engaging and intervening on this. We also highlight, and I think this was the point of the other issue brief we worked on, was that these investments can really be supported and kind of leveraged and catalyzed by increasing investment, kind of fractional investments into improving the coordination across actors within cities. There's no department of food within any of our cities, within any of our local governments. So, like there is a Department of Agriculture or Water or Education or Transport. So in the absence of that coordination, who holds this kind of thematic together? Who connects the dots? And I think we are really advocating for the need for greater coordination and investment into that coordination function as a kind of catalytic intervention. So in the issue brief, we kind of draw on 3 examples of existing intervention points that investors could put resources behind. The first was AfriFood Links, which is currently quite a large EU Horizon funded research program, which has built a very strong, that focuses on urban food environment transformation. And this has built a very strong evidence base across the continent. It's built a very strong network of stakeholders and city officials, as well as implementation partners across 15 African cities and a couple in Europe. So there's a very strong base to work off and a strong series of pilot projects that have been run and initiated by a lot of these cities. And this is focused on 3 things. The first is on infrastructure, the second is on social and cultural preferences, and the third is on kind of supporting small scale enterprises. So we've kind of had those 3 lenses to that. And in each of these points, there's opportunity for scaling and expanding this investment and taking this work and this network and community forwards. So yeah, we've got we kind of outline these in the brief, but we've got currently about 25 pilot projects underway across this program, and there's a lot of scope to select particular ones of those that are doing well and scale those up. support for small businesses, city food kind of governance platforms, and so on. You can see more of this in the issue brief. The second intervention example was the Food Environment Research Network that's kind of championed and led out of the University of Ghana, but also involves a wide range of other partners, both from within Africa and globally. And they've done a lot of work focusing on policy bundles and policy interventions targeting the food environment. So thinking about that kind of more policy arena. And I think there's quite clear examples for where existing policies that have been tried and adopted in certain contexts or countries can be transferred to others, and work to do policy and advocacy work. And I think there's a kind of clear articulation for this in the issue brief. I think they've been some of the leaders on the continent in this space. The third and final one we looked at, just in kind of providing examples, and I think this also picks up on the Sar's comments around the blended finance mechanisms, was thinking about the infrastructure and built environment space, and how we try and provide the alternative. Sorry, there are comments coming up in the chat. Are you telling me I'm running out of time? Okay, sorry, Flo. No. Thinking about what the infrastructural investments we can make into African cities are, and how we can catalyze those. So we know that roughly 80% of food that African cities consume move through urban fresh produce markets rather than supermarkets, and we believe that's an incredible asset for the continent and something we need to really be taking seriously in terms of thinking how we safeguard, because it protects both the rural and small scale production landscapes, but it's a space which is much more resilient in terms of maintaining Indigenous foodways, cultures, and the kind of really rich culinary heritage that Africa has, and providing invaluable livelihoods across the continent. So we have proposed Remark as a kind of blended finance facility, which is being developed and designed to support local governments and cities specifically with the massive financing gap they face with regards to upgrading and improving the kind of urban food infrastructures that cities have direct mandate over across much of Africa. So those were just three examples of ways that we believe investment can be channeled towards transforming and supporting kind of healthier and more resilient urban food environments. And yeah, you can obviously find more in the issue brief to follow. And then obviously really just recognizing the kind of co-authors on this paper with me, and a big thanks to all of them. And you can see them up here on this slide. So yeah, Malik, with that, back over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Luke. And the comment wasn't that you're running out of time, it's that you're providing inputs to a very interesting conversation, as Leonida mentioned. So thanks for that. Yeah, really good issue brief, stressing the importance of focusing on our urban food systems in light of growing trends. I won't comment too much more on that, because I'd like to invite our steering committee members. I don't see Nancy on the call. She may have dropped off for a second. So Lulashu, could I invite you to come on and give your inputs?
All right. Thank you very much, Malik. The participants on this call. My name is Bernard Lolasho, and I want to pick this conversation and reflections from this important session that we have had, especially on the food environment. And it is important to recognize that, yes, certainly our food systems are transforming, and that also the infrastructure in which our food systems really rely on are also transforming. And therefore, I would want to give a very commendable job to the researchers that we've had, who have given us very important insights into this session and into these topics and briefs that we have had. I would want to also just at this point in time want to appreciate that that these issues are really cross-cutting, and as we speak about the silvopastoralist systems, the African foodways, and also the food environments, that these important issues are intertwined, and they're obviously cross-cutting issues. And the issues, for example, of gender have come out very strongly in both the the African Indigenous Foodways and the Silvopastoralist systems. And these are important considerations for us to think even as we move forward, because we really want to make our food systems transformation to be inclusive, and also to integrate knowledge that is important for both decision makers and the food producers, right from the farmers on the ground to the pastoralists to also the consumers. So it's a very inclusive process that needs a systemic approach. And I think this is also very important for us as we think about the African food systems transformation. And so therefore, I would want to make my comments towards the philanthropists and also the decision makers and policy makers who are with us, and also think about the recommendations that have been given by these issue briefs. And I want to appreciate that they're very strong and practical, and that the targeted investments in food systems also should target infrastructure, because these infrastructures are very important for us to think about how we would want to go about our food systems. And it's important to realize that there's a lot of funding that goes to the food systems, or there's a lot of junk and there's a lot of food that is being consumed that is not necessarily as healthy. And this is because of the investments that have really been made towards marketing ultra processed foods, for instance. And therefore, as we think about the transformation of the African food systems, we have to be very cognizant of the infrastructure and also the cuisines, for example, that we think about. And if we're pushing for indigenous African foodways, we have to think about how do we make sure that the ingredients that we get, for example, are indigenous. And so therefore, this means, for example, we can really support initiatives in cities that are promoting African indigenous foodways, that are promoting African recipes, that are promoting African or indigenous African produce. And so therefore really having targeted investments on the infrastructure is a very practical sense to look at how we can transform the African foodways. And therefore I would want to appreciate and say that these comments are relevant, and that the team did a very good job in really looking at the right comments and thinking on the right spots that are targeting the right infrastructure, philanthropic investments, and also investments through government, for example, and through municipals. So I would want to commend the team and each and everyone who did a very good job. So I am open to any questions perhaps that anyone would have. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Lulashu. We still don't have Nancy on the call, but I think you've highlighted some key points. It's really grounding us in the realities of how food systems operate and the strategic entry points that we need to leverage to transform them. Let me then move on to our next speaker, which is, give me 1 second, sorry about that. It is food processing, packaging, and storage, which is Rose Ramkat. Rose, are you able to come on?
Yeah, good evening or good afternoon. Can you? Sorry, I'm somewhere in a conference and my network is a bit weak. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to use my 10 minutes. So can I turn off the video to enhance the bandwidth?
Sure.
Okay, then do I share my policy brief, or you want to share?
Don't worry, you can just speak.
Okay, I can speak without sharing, yes? Okay, then I can just speak it if allowed, if the members would want to see what we had, although they can already be. Sorry?
Yeah, Rose, don't worry. Florian will share it on screen. You can just present now.
Okay, let me stop sharing then so that I can strengthen the bandwidth. So allow me to put it off because of the weakness of where I am, and I've been struggling. So my name is Rose Ramkat, and together with a team who are here with us, Dittoh and the rest, I've not checked if we are there. So we did work on a package on food processing, packaging, and storage. And in this team, we worked with a number of people who I will acknowledge at the end of this work. So in terms of food processing and packaging, we would wish to say that the motivation for doing this particular work came in that we do know by the year around 2030, it is thought that a huge population of people will be there, particularly in Africa. And we think that there is huge market that will be available for feeding these particular people. And therefore, we would imagine that to feed this growing population, and particularly due to urbanization, there will be need to come with alternative ways of feeding these people. So the available food market that is growing due to urbanization, therefore, will look at an increased demand for processed food products, ready to cook or ready to heat foods. And therefore, it means even at the moment, you might find that ultra-processed foods are available or are growing and becoming many in the market. However, with this increase in urbanization, we are seeing changes in dietary patterns. We are seeing changes in domestic value chains, and a lot of things is happening in this processing, packaging, and storage because of the huge demand to process foods. And we imagine that around 75% of food that will be in these urban centers, a lot of them will be processed. However, even despite that, we do know that excessive processing can lead to non-communicable disease, and therefore this particular issue brief was conscious of this, that extra processing can have an adverse effect to the health and health of people, and therefore we were looking at this cautiously and looking at methods that can be, adopted that cannot actually adversely impact on the health and nutrition of the population. So, what are the reasons why that we would want to look at particularly the use of local food crops for processing and packaging? We did realize that there are quite a number of food products that are natural within our communities, or indigenous food products, for example, yam, sorghum, millet, that have not been used, cassava, and all this. So a lot of these food products are harvested a lot within our communities, and therefore they need to really be used, or they need to be processed, packaged, and even stored in a proper manner so that they can, they can fill the gap that is available in providing nutritious foods that, are going to be available throughout the seasons and everywhere. So we imagine that if we could process and package these indigenous foods, then they can be available throughout the seasons, and then they can be utilized by all communities in urban areas rather than relying only on the normal low, high nutritious foods like the white maize or the rice and so on alone. So there are quite a number of things that are available that can be looked at into processing, packaging, and storage for us to benefit on that. So in this particular issue brief, we did find that there were many food products, as I've mentioned, that were in the community, which could be processed and packaged, and some of them even included millet and so on. And by looking in the literatures, we did find that there are quite a number of millet products, for example, fermented probiotic foods that are available from millet-based beverages. And we know that fermentation, for example, is quite good because it can increase even the overall nutritional value of flour and even reduce, improve the physiochemical profiles and reduce things that are not good physiochemically. And then now it means that if people can take this fermented food, then the nutritional status can really improve a lot. However, there are other issues that surround this particular process of processed food and products, which comes along with this is the challenge of the need of certification of processed and packaged products. So we did look a lot of these cases that there were many foods that were available, that were being processed and everything in the market, but there were challenges in that many of them were not certified products, and therefore we saw that there is need for having a voiced kind of regional way of doing certification of these particular processed products and processed products. So in looking at the landscape currently in Kenya, Ghana, and Malawi, where we were focusing on, we did find that there were quite a number of key stakeholders that are working in processing, packaging, and storage. Some of them were government institutions, others were foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates, others were international organizations that have funded a lot of activities. We had, for example, UNDP, we had FAO, we also had other like the Green and Climate Fund, for example, who have been trying to scale up a lot of climate resilience and adaptive processes in Kenya and Malawi, trying to enable that farmers can be climate resilient and adaptive by adoption of maybe processing and of food products, particularly at the farm level. So there were quite a number of things that were there, and therefore, why we look at this particular issue of reefs, why do we think that therefore processing, packaging, and storage can be important to philanthropies is that going by the way that we saw a lot of food products being available in the farmers' fields that were, that were not being stored well or packaged well, then we imagine that if we would undertake mild or processing, for example, and the key ones that we thought that we could do is drying and fermentation, then we could be able to reduce the food waste that are available within the community. And then we were also looking at if we could be able to process food products, then sometimes it comes along with food waste products from these processed products. For example, if you look at tamarind, you'll get that if you process, you get a lot of shells from the tamarind products themselves. And therefore, we thought if you only process without focusing on the waste, then we would have a problem in the environment. So we thought while processing food products, we need to handle the waste products that come along it, for example, by converting those waste products into fuels, which can go a long way in, making the processing process sustainable. Then another thing, we thought that if we process food products, then it is capable to exploit multiple use of these local foods. Maybe therefore we can have a lot of products in the value chain. For example, maybe you can have flour, you can have even probiotic products, you can have many different food products that can be used once it is processed, and then this food can be available throughout the seasons. So there are quite a number of things or motivations that we think can enable the philanthropies. For example, if we do sustainable production and consumption through processing, then we'll be also achieving or we'll be aligning production of food products or foods into the SDG 12 on the need of responsible consumption and production. And then we also want to create demand for more traditional and local food products for social, so that we can have a social impact and economic empowerment within the communities. So while we were looking with these case studies that we tried to focus on, we did try to focus on some case studies in Ghana. And in Ghana, we looked at millet and sorghum. We also looked at baobab, and we found that there are quite a number of products, for example, from baobab, like leaves that are being used by people. People are making powder from this baobab pulp, and some of these products were available in the market. Some were packaged, others were in rudimental containers that maybe occupy less spaces and everything. But we did find that there were some challenges in that the main challenge of these local products was competition, particularly from maize, for example. Another challenge that were also seen is that if you look at the seed of this particular baobab, the people found that they were not aware of how they can use the seed of baobab other than, ground it only and making soup, but they thought they can also press maybe oil or products from this seed. So they were saying they are not yet fully aware of how they can express the oil from these seeds and everything. Then in the case of tamarind, there were, and then another thing they thought is that while processing these products, these small seeds like baobab, they found that all the time the pods were breaking and they were releasing itchy substances. Therefore, they say they don't have protective materials for processing and everything. Therefore, we found that if we could bring in scientific knowledge to bridge into this local knowledge, then they would be able to handle or find a way of mitigating these itchy substances that are coming out, which could be phytochemicals that are harmful to their skin and everything. So we thought we need to bridge by bringing in science to add into this local language. Then another thing that we also found is that in Malawi, there were other things that they were processing, for instance, and some of the things they were processing was like cassava flour, for example, and they had a major challenge in that most of the techniques they were using in processing were outdated technological, for the example, the mortar and pestle. And the main challenge is that while they are grinding things, for example, like groundnut flours, it leads to if there is bad weather, for example, then it leads to challenges in drying, for example, the flours like cassava and everything. And when there's poor drying, then it leads to poor color and taste of the processed product. So they thought also another challenge in that peeling cassava takes very long time and everything, and therefore it means we need to have techniques or technologies, machineries that can improve this particular process. Additionally, they thought that the processing environment was not good, because if they put and try to dry things on open racks, then the animals come and eat. And there was a challenge whereby sometimes the farmers would wish to dry, particularly the ones in the lake, they want to dry cassava with the same racks that they're using to dry fish. And therefore there was cross-contamination of the smell and flavors, which caused a lot of problem. And then another thing also was that in Kenya, we did look at some of the things that were there, and we saw there were a lot of challenges, particularly in Kenya, because some of the things that were available in Kenya is that processing were also still on technological challenges and old techniques. Some people were using the local kind of mortar and pestle, and others were even fermenting millet products in dirty equipment, for example, water containers that were not clean and so on. However, they were even using plastic containers and polythene bags to store processed products, or looking just for anything that can take small space, and they were not quite appropriate. Even the storage structures were those that are quite old and old in time, and therefore they could not use a lot, they could not do a lot of things, and they were getting damp and everything. And the challenges of getting aflatoxins are very high because they have already been reported in those areas. So one thing that we found is that local food preservation can be improved using renewable technologies. There were some that had been installed many years, but they are no longer working. And therefore we thought if this can be used or integrated, then it could be okay. Then another thing also we thought could be, for example, if they could incorporate the use of IoT in processing, then maybe they could see at which stages is the optimum processing occurring, and therefore they would be able to maintain that processed food products are monitored from the time of from the time fermentation starts, and during storage, you monitor how they are keeping and so on, so that they don't go into waste, and the aflatoxins level are reduced, and we can be able to know if the food is going bad or it is still staying well. So how do we look at these adults, and how can we therefore, what are the adults that are leading or disabling us to transition? Is a lack of commitment by government and NGOs in Ghana. And in Malawi, we thought the adults that are not enabling them to transition to fully processing is lack of unclear regulations or safety measures governing or guiding packaging activities, then poor quality of packaged products. For example, as I mentioned, they were using, for example, leaf structures to store processed vegetables or dried vegetables, and all the time they were breaking. And some of them, even the plastic sachets that they were using for processed tomato paste, were always breaking. Then there was limited knowledge on proper labeling and lack of available, durable, innovative local packaging materials. While in Kenya, we had limited skills and knowledge on processing and packaging storage, then there was lack of processing and storing facilities for the local products. And then therefore, we recommend to promote transition that we need to mobilize governments, private sectors for strong collaboration to improve facilities and infrastructure. Then there's need to promote research and development. There's need to support integration of traditional methods and modern methods. Then there's need to mobilize innovators in processing, packaging, and storage. Then we still need a lot of capacity building to upscale the use of technologies. Technical assistance is needed. Training programs for farmers, processors, food handlers on modern processing techniques, quality control, food safety, and paying close attention to regulation by laws on the same. Then there's need for mapping produce with high wastage so that we can focus on those ones. For example, we can focus in Malawi, tomatoes and pawpaw, and prioritize everything into that. While in Ghana, we can map out and focus maybe on tangerines and tubers, while in Kenya, maybe we can look at vegetables and mangoes in Kerio Valley, or even traditional cereals and tubers. So we map out and see which products are highly affected, and then we concentrate on those ones. Then we promote fair trade, particularly for farmers and women who are processing their food products. Then we continue supporting marketing, identification of case studies and models that are working elsewhere, and then we implement in Kenya, Tanzania, and Kenya, Malawi, and Ghana. Then we look at labeling and go for a regional type of labeling approach. So with that, I would wish to acknowledge the AFSTC, the African Foods Transformation Collective, the African Climate Foundation, the Center of Excellence of Food Security, and all reviewers of this issue brief. Therefore, I also want to acknowledge our co-authors for this publication. And with that, I want to acknowledge Professor Dittoh, Dr. Maureen Cheserek, Dr. Kimtai, and Professor Milton and Professor Chamba from Malawi, who contributed a lot in this particular issue brief. So that is the brief that we wanted to present as a team. So thank you, and back to you, Malik.
Thank you very much for that, Rose. Obviously, a critical issue in food systems is how we use foods and their byproducts to add value, to add nutritional standards, and to reduce waste. You've given a lot of recommendations, a lot to do with the sort of research and development, the innovation, the enterprise development, and some avenues for entry for philanthropies, such as the convening space, the support for research, and others. So with that, let's move swiftly on to George Onyango, who will be presenting on food storage, transport, and logistics infrastructure in Africa. George.
Thank you, Malik. Our team was made up of colleagues from Kenya, myself, Uganda, Robert Bitario, and Naomi Kandawini from Ghana. So those three countries provided us with the anchor for this particular policy brief. If you look at the title talks about food storage, transport, and logistics infrastructure. The storage in our case was focusing on storage for purposes of transport and logistics, as opposed to the just completed presentation by Rose, which looks at the whole totality of storage. So our focus was on logistics, basically. The issue about food systems is something that is quite interesting, especially with the rapid urbanization that we're having in this continent, where urban areas, peri-urban areas, and the rural areas have different kinds of dynamics in terms of food transport logistics, with the assumption that urban areas have better transport and logistics infrastructure. This is not necessarily true, considering that the bulk of African cities have large neighborhoods of informal settlements and poor population. So we looked at the transport at different levels, looking at how the transport and transport storage affects the ecological transitions, right from the local level, at the production level, where we looking at issues of food loss and food waste, where issues of security during storage and transportation, issues of nutrition, sustainable agriculture and rural livelihoods. We're also addressing issues of climate change and social equity and global sustainability. How do those particular parameters play when we're looking at issues of agroecological transitions with regards to transport and logistics? That formed the thrust of our argument. So we looked at the three areas: food storage, focusing on issues of practices to reduce food waste. We looked at food transport, looking at different kinds of transport systems that we have, whether they're modern transport system or intermediate transport systems that reduces food miles, especially in the last mile kind of logistics. And then you look at the food logistics infrastructure that exists at the local level, at the national level and at the regional level, because they have different implications in terms of how we manage our food transport and logistics. We looked at the different stakeholders within this particular sector, because each of them has a different role to play in terms of food storage, transport, and trade logistics. Government agencies in terms of developing policies and macro infrastructure systems. We have private sector companies that engage in providing different kinds of interventions at micro and macro level. We looked at non-governmental organizations. We looked at transporters who play a very key role in terms of moving the foods from the production all the way to the consumer. And we look at the traders. And then, of course, there's the researchers. But key to all this is the farmer. And most of the times we find that the biggest contributor in the food system is the farmer, and not just the large-scale farmers, but the small-scale farmers who have different roles and functions within the food system. And they have the biggest challenge because of, one, they are small-scale. So already they have an issue of how much quantity they can be able to store and transport economically. Then two, they are usually challenged in terms of resources. And so they are the biggest culprits in terms of the inefficiencies of the transport systems and logistics that we have. So why do we do this particular food policy brief? The most important thing here is that we want to have systems that work. And most times when you look at food, there's a tendency of looking at food as agriculture. But we appreciate that food is part of a system. And if you take a systems approach to food, then you begin to look at several parameters that come into play in terms of foods as a system. When you talk about the storage infrastructure, what kind of persons put up the storage infrastructure, the construction, the maintenance, and so on. When you look at the transport, what kind of transport systems do you have for the food? Is it bulk transport? Is it small transport? And of course, there's been the rise of the bicycle and the motorbike in terms of the transport system, especially in the urban areas and rural areas in different ways. How does that operate? What kind of trade infrastructure do we have in place? We gave examples of what has been done in different countries in terms of the trade infrastructure, whether they are markets or whether they are supermarkets or whether they are online trading systems and so on. Each of them has different implications in terms of ensuring that you have a food system that works. The rural-urban dichotomy also comes out because there are different issues in terms of the transport logistics that you'd be able to operate in rural areas, because the low densities that you have in rural areas might make certain transport logistical systems not very effective, cost-effective. So the rise of the motorbike and the bicycle has actually changed rural transport in terms of moving food to the market. And this is something that is taken for granted, but has a lot of potential in terms of improving access to food, especially for the rural community, and getting their food to the market. So there are different kinds of implications, not just for the movement, but also the volumes that you're able to transport. We did a quick context analysis, Uganda, Ghana, and Kenya, because then the context gave us a feel of how these particular parameters would work in different countries. But irrespective of the context, we find that there are certain cross-country issues that we are able to build out. That is, the most outstanding is things like adequacy of storage methods. The traditional methods of storage has lots of inadequacies in terms of ensuring the quality of the food at the end when you now want to be able to use it, either in the market or at the consumer level. There are issues about attitudes of youth and women in terms of food systems that you have in different countries. What can the youth do? What can the women do? And how does it work? And so on. The issue is that storage then becomes critical in terms of ensuring that we minimize perishability, because that is usually the biggest culprit, how we store our foods. And there's also loss during transportation, how we package the food for purposes of transportation, and then how we are able to sell it when it reaches the destination. What are the logistics that we put in place to ensure that this actually then works? We looked at the issues of the transport and logistics at the farm level and at the city level and at the regional level, because at the different levels you have different kinds of considerations, because at the farm level probably you're just trying to aggregate what you have so that you can get it into bulk and take it to the market. At the city level, you're trying to get the consumers accessing this particular food, so you have different transport systems that will ensure that the fresh produce reaches those particular markets on time, in time. And at the African level, we are talking about how you can be able to have trade at the regional level, depending on what kind of storage we have, whether we have solar-powered storage systems, or whether we have community-managed storage systems, or we have metal silos. The different systems will determine how we are able to leverage that. So how do we, in view of time, I think I want to just quickly move to what we focused on in terms of recommendation to policymakers. One is that, yes, we normally have all these systems being put in place, but it's important that you align it with the national development plans and global agendas. When that happens, then it gives relevance to whatever it is that you want to do, because then it fits within what is already being done at the government level or at the global level, and it becomes easy for philanthropists to get a buy-in. Two, we also said that we need to have evidence-based research, because that proves that you have effective that are based with data, based on research, and it's possible to now position scalability depending on the kind of evidence-based research you've engaged in. Then we are talking about investment risks, mitigating the investment risk through insurance schemes, because then the private sector would feel confident to come in because their investment would be protected given those kind of insurance schemes. And then they're supporting modern storage infrastructure and intermediate transport system, because that would then address the people we were talking about, the poor farmers, because they need not just bulking, but they're also able to get the products in volumes that are quite effective for purposes of mainstreaming the systems. So we had 3 case studies. We looked at the grain warehouse receiving system in Uganda. We looked at the cycling out of poverty in Kenya and the AFSTC. Each of them giving different perspectives about the issues of transport logistics based on experiences that we have in each of these countries. The warehousing recipient system in Uganda allows people to actually be able to track the wares. In Kenya, the cycling out of poverty enables piloting use of cycles for different kinds of interventions in terms of transport logistics. And the AFSTC looks at using solar power technology for storage and so on. So this is, I think, a brief summary of our policy brief, and we acknowledge the input of the different community members that generated the information that informed this particular policy brief, and the African Food Systems Transformation Collective for enabling us share this with the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. I think that was a really valuable and important contribution. I just remember visiting in Uganda, being absolutely amazed by all the bodas and the way in which people are coping with the infrastructure challenges of this rapid urbanization. And obviously that translates into how we get food from processing or production through to people. And I I think you've provided a broad overview of a number of really interesting innovations that really can help move that forward and allow the transition to really supply these growing urban populations with produce that derives from local and agroecological production and processing. And that essentially this transport dimension really is what is almost the glue which stitches together all the different food systems segments and ultimately enables food to reach market. And so the issue of markets is a really important one. And Africa has a real broad range of really vibrant markets that enable consumers to access food. And this was the subject of the last issue brief that we'll be presenting today. Professor Dittoh will be speaking to that particular issue brief, and I'll be scrolling through the brief in the background. Sa, please go ahead. You're still muted.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Lauren. Yes, our brief talking about the almost the end of the food chain in a sense, maybe except consumption. And maybe I can start and say that in the chat, somebody did complain, or not complain, but mention that the French-speaking people were left out. So we had somebody from the French-speaking place to join us. But I am Sir Dittoh from the University for Development Studies. I'm a agricultural development and food systems economist at the university. But I'm currently actually working on food, on agroecology, EU-funded project on agroecology in Cape Verde, Ghana, Senegal, and the Gambia. And those that took part in this particular brief, as Rose mentioned, is herself, Rose Ramkat, Sambulela is obviously she's from the university in South Africa. Elvier Sosa is from the University of Abubakar Levi in Benin, a French-speaking person. And definitely our editors were very, very instrumental in getting to where we got to. The question is why this, what are we really looking for? What is it that we are talking about? The brief highlights is that retail, or for that matter, marketing, seems to be the greatest leverage in the things that we are talking about. If you produce a food and nobody is eating it or cannot buy it, definitely there's a problem. It's not in a position to. So there are a lot of infrastructural problems, a lot of socio-economic problems and governance challenges that are faced by food marketers, small-scale food or smallholder farmers and small-scale food marketers, both in the public market as well as in the transit routes. I've seen a few pictures of the transit routes and the markets. Some of the food is lying on the ground and so on. So there are a lot of problems with infrastructure. And definitely that is a problem that we need to look at. There's also a problem of street vending. People are running around along the streets trying to sell, and they're harassed in so many times. And this whole thing is there a way we can leverage? We're talking of production earlier. We're talking of marketing. We're talking of processing and all that. The thing that leverages all these is definitely the market, somebody to buy the food. And that is why this is a very important brief that put together. Now, the challenges faced in the marketing of agroecological products will dampen attempts to increase production and productivity. And therefore, it will be a clog in our agroecology transition. if we really want to transition, and we have serious problems with marketing, definitely there are problems, especially as we know that smallholder farmers produce the bulk of the food that we eat. And in fact, they are the greatest investors in food production or generally in agriculture across the world. We're not talking of only Africa. So there is need to highlight the possible areas of investments. And we also know that their practices, small farmer practices, tend to be more resilient and sustainable. They tend to improve our planetary health, human health, animal health. And therefore, it is really very important for us to be able to see how we can do all these things, or at least improve marketing, especially territorial market, to be able to improve human nutrition, food justice, the empowerment of local people. So basically, that is what we are trying to do, or we tried to do. So maybe I'll go straight to the key findings, because virtually all the things that were discussed earlier by virtually everybody today are hovering around basically the same kind of situation that we are having, because they are almost all going through towards marketing. So maybe let's look at the findings in what we really found out. And we worked in Benin, Ghana, and, Kenya, and South Africa. And the greatest of all the challenges is infrastructure. In all the countries, we find that infrastructure is a big problem. Maybe we should start from the Benin. Let's go back to the Benin. Capital was also a very critical issue. Lack of capital to function at scales that are profitable. Again, these are problems across all the, because these are small, the marketers are small producers, not small marketers. The farmers are also smallholder farmers, and capital had been a big problem. Capital here, we're talking of finance in terms of loans and then credit. Basically, because if they are able to access credit at reasonable rates, interest rates, definitely to be able to do better and be more profitable. Then they had a serious competition from imported food across West Africa and across Africa. So you find out that food that compete with agroecological products are dumped into the countries. And definitely, if you dump rice and you dump maize at very cheap prices, or even poultry products at cheap prices, that depresses everything that we can produce locally. And that is a big problem, again, across all of Africa. And those are the key issues that we did find out. Again, as I mentioned, in Ghana, dilapidated roads is also in Benin, actually, between cities, between towns and villages, and even across the whole country. You can hardly do anything with such horrible market infrastructure, routes. Then in the markets themselves, you have a whole lot of horrible market infrastructure. Go to the market, I know the sanitation is terrible, and they have to put the food on the ground, as I said, and there are no sheds to be able to put them in the same way, and therefore a lot of food loss and waste, a lot of danger of diseases and so on. Cereal marketers in rural areas also complain a lot about exploitation by the middlemen and women. They go to the villages, buy them at very low prices, and bring them to cities, and they virtually double or even triple. And that is very serious problems. Tedious work. In Kenya, complaining, wake up at 4 a.m. and by 10 p.m. they are still trying to sell something, figure out something for their livelihoods. Limited capital, as I mentioned, that's a problem. Then the political instability, again, in Kenya, it has been a problem. In other countries, maybe not too bad. So these are problems that they all face. In South Africa, there is this problem of street vendors are everywhere, but in South Africa, it is such a serious problem that we all know, and the harassment of these street vendors had actually been a big problem. So farmers, retailers, marketers operate in territorial markets with very formidable socioeconomic, infrastructural, and governance problems, safety problems, sanitation problems, and something should definitely be done if we really want to transition appropriately to agroecological production processes. The method of production, that is the method of agroecological production of these foods that we're talking about, being leveraged by marketing, definitely boosts biodiversity, climate resilience, and then maintenance and restoration of key ecosystems. For example, the cultural heritage is so much in the territorial, so the agroecological products that we actually produce. I think Stacy in the chat, Jill did mention that we should have some of these things on the shelves. Yes, if we put them in the shelves, we should put them so that they can actually bought. And that is the issue we are talking about. There's a need to put them in the shelf because they are more nutritious, they are more healthy to all of us. And therefore, that's what we're talking about. The cultural heritage, I think, is very important, therefore leading to food sovereignty, food justice. So there's so much in promoting territorial markets to ensure that we actually get exactly what we want. We looked through everything and we realized that 10 of the principles of agroecology are linked to food retail and food informality. Recycling, for example, is something very critical. Again, we're talking of food loss and waste. If there can be circularity, again, I think somebody mentioned it, definitely we are going to go very far. So recycling, which is part of the 13 principles, is very strong in promoting retail marketing, for creation of knowledge, social values and diets. That's what we're talking about much earlier, about fairness, connectivity, participation, resilience, solidarity, economy. These are things that are which are very much embedded in territorial markets. Territorial markets are those that are around us that we can easily buy things without going through all these formal processes of trying to get our products. And they are things that majority of the people, both in rural areas and in urban areas, are dependent on. We actually find them the best in terms of everything that we really want to eat. And everybody treasures them. And in Ghana, in other countries, people go very early in the night. I mean, in the early morning, 4 a.m., they will go to the markets because they want to get the fresh food from the community, from the villages. They bring them, and they get this from the communities. So our recommendations based on what we just talked about, and then can you bring that if you don't mind? Our recommendations are actually based on what we just discussed. Number one, basic infrastructure needs to be purposefully designed for locally produced foodstuffs. And we think that philanthropy can help in this direction. In particular, well-structured market stalls with adequate storage in cities, towns, and communities. Civil society organizations require support to be able to do this thing. And as we said, sometimes it is very dangerous in some of the things, risk of fires. And we've had that in a number of examples, like, for example, in the Mbarere market in Uganda. Philanthropic investments into research and advocacy to deepen the understanding of how territorial markets actually function It's very, very highly recommended because yes, we know about territorial markets, we know about all these markets all over the place. How do they actually function, and how can they function much better, more profitably for the people, more decently, having the infrastructure around them and all that? And we believe that greater research and advocacy can really help in that direction. Legislation definitely we think is very important for in the case of street vending and this harassment of street vendors, because they are doing a valuable job. They are doing a valuable service to all of us. But then the harassment is can we do something about it? Therefore, we can do something about it. Yes, this may be for government, but we know that philanthropy can sometimes influence what's happening in our countries. They are very much in the position to influence policymakers and politicians. Concept of farmers markets need to be analyzed very well and see how we can promote them. Again, these are farmer markets should become special markets within territorial market system. So yes, as we are analyzing the territorial market system, trying to understand it well, can we also situate the farmers market within it and see how we can integrate it and make it a normal process in all our countries. Say philanthropy can support that very much. Local food marketing and processing, it was taken by Ramkat, has great potential for decent job creation. Again, marketing, you find out that it's really a very decent job if we do it well. Running around the cars selling definitely cannot be called a decent job, but we can do something about that and make it more decent. Or your produce on the ground definitely cannot be decent. Special training programs on the functioning and development of territorial markets should be organized for graduates of purchased studies and others, and to promote the idea of territorial markets. This whole idea, nobody, even in our training systems, in the schools of agriculture and then universities, nobody actually talks much about territorial markets. Yes, we have courses on in marketing, but nobody talks about territorial markets. We are doing all the traditional things. Again, can we really bring this down into such a way that we can push it across? Getting it into the curricula can be difficult unless those teaching it are really convinced of what we are talking about. But many of us, especially in the tertiary institutions, tend to be just following what we have learned from somewhere else, rather than trying to see how do we solve the problems on the ground. And I think that's why I think we think that this brief is really very, very important, and for philanthropy to also help get these things done in the various countries across Africa. Yes, we took only 4 countries to give an example, but you can go see all these in virtually any country you go to. And I'm sure many of you have gone to so many other countries, and you see exactly the same kinds of challenges, socioeconomic, governance, infrastructural, sanitation, all these kinds of problems, we see them across almost all the countries. Well, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And we want to really be grateful to Dr. Florin and all of you for all that you have done. We also did appreciate the fact that we had this meeting in Kigali, and we really learned a lot from colleagues and from people that we brought around. It helped us a lot to be able to put this in the way that we did. Well, I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much for everything that has happened.
Thank you so much, Prof. Star. That's, I think, one of the most important aspects of African food systems that's often neglected in terms of where philanthropies focus, and particularly in the promotion of agroecological transitions. If we can get our markets and our distribution systems to really provide access to locally produced food and agroecologically produced food, it can really help us to leverage the enormous potential of growing African cities to then create the demand that'll hopefully drive transition also in the countryside. So thank you for leading this, and I really also appreciate your approach as someone who's really hands-on in research, not just purely academic, but really also involved in the the direct interaction with stakeholders. So thanks for leading that team. So now we're going to ask Makore Mohochi to offer us a few reflections. Makore is with the Kenyan Competition Authority and has a keen insight into market dynamics more broadly, and a strong interest also, I think, in food loss and waste. I remember in all of the gatherings that we've had, that's been one of the points that he's emphasized a lot. So I'm quite curious to hear his reflections on the issue briefs that we've heard thus far. Please go ahead.
Hello, Lauren, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I say congratulations to all the presenters who have given great insights on the issue briefs. Yeah, first of all, I'll introduce myself, and then my reflection will take a different structure. So I'm Makore Wilson, and I currently work with the Competition Authority of Kenya, where I focus on buyer power regulation, contract fairness, and sustainable supply chains. I also sit in the advisory committee of the African Climate Foundation under the African Food System Transformation Collective, where I contribute mostly on research and advocacy for agroecological transitions in Africa. And when I look at this one, I look at my professional path, it has moved along the areas of public policy research, regulatory enforcement, and inclusive development, with a special interest in disability inclusion, circular economy, and the food systems resilience, whereby this one also comes closer to what we have been handling at African Food System Transformation Collective. I also look further on how this team relates to my personal experience and where this team, especially the one presented by Dr. George Onyango, is very relevant to me, especially in my profession. So this issue brief on food storage, transport, and trade infrastructure resonates deeply with my work and lived experience, where in my daily work, I've seen firsthand how unequal market structures and delayed payments undermine smallholder suppliers, especially those basically in the perishable food value chains, where post-harvest losses can reach up to, for example, 30 to 40%, especially in the African context. The absence of reliable storage and the logistic systems, for example, makes farmers vulnerable to buyer dominance and food wastes. As you have mentioned, that is a topic that is very, very important and key to me. Precisely the challenges the brief highlights for Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. In my role in the advisory committee at the African Food System Transformation Collective, it has allowed me to engage with evidence showing the agroecological transitions, or showing that agroecological transitions such as the solar-powered cold storage, cooperative transport, and the warehouse receipt system. This is especially something that came up in Kenya through an act of parliament of 2019, the warehouse receipt systems, not only cut food loss, but also promote equity, inclusion, and community resilience. So these findings connect with my broader advocacy for inclusive agroecology, especially looking at 13 principles of agroecology, ensuring that the people with disability, women, and youth are not left behind in emerging food systems investments, which is an area that we also need to give more focus to ensure that this such section of the populace is also included in the African food systems. I've also been brought up in a farming community, and I've witnessed how lack of simple storage transport options can erase months of labor. This motivates as well my passion for policies that make infrastructure accessible, locally owned, and climate smart, which resonates well with what Dr. George Onyango has also offered and under the key findings that he found out through this research. So the message that I can have to the philanthropists and how best I can ensure that we realize the findings that the various presenters have given forth, especially on this one, I'll say that we need to invest in intermediate, locally appropriate infrastructures, whereby I believe that philanthropies should support solar-powered cold rooms, community warehouses, and affordable transport, such as motorbikes and tuk-tuks, for example, what I have always been seeing in Africa. And I believe that these are scalable low-carbon solutions that directly empower smallholders and women traders to ensure that at least they offer their best in the transformation of the food systems in Africa. We also need to adopt long-term systems thinking approaches, whereby I believe that a short-term or short project cycles rarely sustain impact. And I will ask the philanthropists funding should align with national plans under the 13 principles of agroecology, especially participation, fairness, and the co-creation of knowledge to build the capacity and ownership at the community level. That means the community needs to be engaged, but now this one needs to be on long term, not just on the short term. I also believe that philanthropy should champion inclusion and evidence-driven policies, whereby they need to invest in data systems, local research, and inclusive governance, so that the food system investment reflect the realities of small producers, persons with disabilities, women, youth, and all inclusive. This typically evidence-based participatory funding transforms charity into solidarity and structural changes, which can easily transform the food systems in Africa and even globally. So in observance of the minutes I have, and in conclusion and closing remarks, I say, we need transforming Africa's food storage and the logistics system is not just a technical issue. It is a question of justice, dignity, and sustainability, which also came clear in the presentation made by Dr. Onyango. And I believe that by working with local actors and investing in inclusive evidence-based innovations, philanthropies can help Africa move from vulnerability to resilience. So those are my few remarks, and I believe that a philanthropy can also find a way to incorporate them to ensure that at least we transform food systems in Africa in line with the African Food System Transformation Collective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makore. Such a powerful finish. So I'm not going to add anything more to that, except to say that this was now the last of the Issue Brief launch webinars. Thank you for sticking with us for this slightly longer format. What now remains is to think about our broader overarching strategy. We've worked for the last several months to develop a broader strategic brief that looks at this from the kind of bird's eye perspective. What do all of these recommendations mean? All these 19 issue briefs that we've produced together. And what will be the role for the African Food Systems Transformation Collective going forward? So that strategic brief has incorporated all the different recommendations from the different issue briefs and has been through an extensive process of internal peer review with the leaders of the issue brief teams, as well as with the advisory committee of the AFSTC, and is now in its final stages of production and proofing. So once that is done, we will convene another webinar to share the strategic brief and also to discuss its implications and how we want to take forward the work of the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. So please stay tuned, look out for that invitation. We'll let you know as soon as we are ready to launch that. And we hope that it will inform really deep rethinking amongst philanthropies in how to support and promote transition towards agroecological food systems across Africa. So thank you all, colleagues, for the excellent work that you have done. Thank you to all the people who joined and listened. We look forward to taking these recommendations forward and to continuing and deepening the work of the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. Thank you all very much for joining. I hope you have a beautiful day further, and we will stay in touch.